everyone, my name is Emily from FairandValiantCosplay. A couple months ago, I completed my biggest project I've ever done after taking a long break from cosplay, and that is making one of Nadja's dresses from What We Do in the Shadows. What We Do in the Shadows is a TV show on Hulu and FX. It's really funny and it's one of my favorite shows. Nadja has a lot of beautiful costumes in the show, most of which are in the style of the late Victorian period. But my favorite one is this beautiful black and brown damask gown. She wears it a few times in the show, along with it being featured in some of the promo photos for season 1. That all being said, one thing that's really important about making period costumes and period cosplays is thinking about the undergarments. If I made this dress in more like a modern day bra, it's not gonna look right. So before I could even start working on the dress, I had to think about the undergarments. I did make a set of combinations. Combinations are a easily washable romper looking thing from the late 19th century that was usually worn as like the skin layer underneath everything, all the other parts of the dress. I just didn't film any of it because I didn't get the idea to start filming my process or making things until it was almost done. But I did make it, so it's right here. So once the combinations were finished, it was time to start thinking about the next layer. And it's a really important part, and that is the corset. And that's what today's video is about. The fashion layer was a silk dupioni that I got from Silk Baron. The second layer, which is the strength layer, is coutil. I got this from Cali Cat Creations on Etsy. It's usually what's used as a strength layer for corsets. Coutil can be really expensive. I decided to use a duck canvas left over from another project as the third layer. And for the lining, I decided to use some novelty cotton that I got left over from my grandmother when she gave me some sewing supplies. For the boning, I decided to use some synthetic whalebone. I also got a roll of bone casing, a front closing busk, and a grommeting kit, and those are all from corsetmakingsupplies.com. For decoration, I got some 1-inch black lace that has this like gold accents, and I got this from Mood. The final notions were embroidery thread, double fold bias tape, and of course, thread. The first thing I did was cut all 4 layers of the corset. I just traced the pieces directly onto the fabric, marking notches. Once everything was cut, I needed to flatline the pieces. I decided to do it by hand because flatlining by hand gives you a lot more control to prevent bubbling. It does take a lot more time to do it this way, but I had the time and it gave me a really nice hold. Just to be clear, the silk dupioni was flatlined to the coutil, and then the duck canvas was flatlined to the novelty cotton. After everything was flatlined, I then serged the sides of all the pieces. You will notice that I serged the tops and bottoms of all the pieces. This was pointless, but I guess I was on autopilot at the time. Since I had already made 2 mock-ups at this point, I already had bones and bone casings that were cut to the proper length, so I just reused them. First I put the busk in, trying not to stab myself in the process. The pattern called for the corset to be constructed with the sandwich method. I'd actually never used this method, so it was interesting. Essentially, you just sew each piece in a way that the seam of each piece is sandwiched in the seam of the next piece, and then you just turn over the back and top stitch it closed. Once that was done, I started making the boning channels. I started with the ones that were part of the seams that were already built into the corset. To be honest, this was kind of hard. At this point, the corset was extremely thick and it was difficult for my machine to sew through. I also didn't cut down the seam allowance, which meant that when I tried to slide the bones in, they kept getting caught in the seams. So I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong there or if that's just how the method works, but it was kind of a frustrating process. After those boning channels were done, I added the boning channels that go in between the seams. For this, I just top stitched the boning channels onto the inside of the corset. I put 2 extra channels in each panel, except for the center front and the center back since they had the other hardware. A good thing to know about corsets is that the more boning channels you have, the more comfortable it's going to be. You don't want to have more than like 1.5 inches at most in between each bone. After that, I put in the grommets. You can see the hammer is shaking the camera here. Then I decided to base some decorative lace to the top of the corset. I did it before binding the top so it would just sit nicely in the binding. Next, it was time to bind the top, so here I am machine stitching bias tape to the top of the corset. Once the other side was machine stitched on, I then flipped the corset over and then pinned and ironed the other side in place. And then I just slip stitched the other side of the bias tape to the corset. Once the top part of the corset was completely bound, I slid in the bones that were left over from the mock-ups. They were already cut. Once the bones were put in, I then started to backstitch the bias tape to the bottom of the corset. If you're wondering why I did this part by hand, it's actually because the bust I had bought was actually a little too long for the final version of the corset, and the edge of it was sitting inside of the seam allowance. So sewing this part by hand means I didn't have to buy another busk. I did this part exactly like I did to the top edge of the corset. I flipped it over, ironed everything nicely, and then pinned the other side to the wrong side of the corset. Once again, I slip stitch the edge of the binding to the inside of the corset. So at this point the corset is technically done, but I did want to try flossing. Flossing is when you essentially embroider around the bones. It was popular during the late Victorian period, which is about the time period of this costume. And it's both practical and decorative, so it's really pretty. It took forever though. And the corset is done. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think I had a little bit of trouble with the sandwich method. I'm not sure if I'm gonna try that next time. That being said, I think it turned out really nicely. It feels very secure. I like the decorative bits. I like the embroidery down here and then the lace up here. I think that's really pretty. And another thing I wish I had done was put either two plastic bones in the center back or one steel bone in the center back on each side, of course, because it's not quite, like sometimes it like isn't quite as strong as I need it to be when I'm lacing it up. But that's just more of like something to remember next time for when I'm making something for myself, of like what I prefer. I think this was a successful project, so thank you all so much for making it to the end of this video. I've been wanting to make a YouTube channel for a while now, and so this is very exciting for me. I can already tell you what the next video on the channel is going to be. It's a cat's in my lap. She's shedding. It's going to be making the petticoat for my Nadja cosplay. So it's going to be the second part in the series. I have some exciting things coming up this year. I really hope you guys will come back. Like I said, I really appreciate if you're here. I'm going to put the materials and a link to my socials in the description, and I hope to see you guys next time.